win. So he's just that strong, and his adrenaline would get pumping, and he'd forget it was work, and he'd become very aggressive. So, but a lot of the talents, when the cowboy asked you to work out with somebody, you didn't want to disappoint him, whether you wanted to be a mentor or not. You did it, and most of the guys were very willing to help Doc because he was a very endearing personality. He wanted to learn. He listened. Again, while you recruit athletes, he could take coaching. He's been taking coaching his entire life, wrestling in junior high, high school, football, all that stuff. Track and field, as you mentioned. If there was a sport playing in season, Doc was on the team. So he's used to being coached up. And I like that aspect of it for the fact that some guys who are more of the entertainer situation sometimes take exception to being corrected. And he never had that issue. He was a product of his environment, and that environment led to becoming a good student of the game of pro wrestling.
His first match happens May 26, 1982 in Shreveport, Louisiana. He gets a win over Billy Starr. He actually has his second match the very same night, defeating the Turk. Fast forward, and he gets a title shot very quickly in the Mid-South Louisiana title tournament. It's the July 6, 1982 showing. Ultimately, he'd lose to the one-man gang in the first round. Fast forward into 83, and in January, he has a couple of matches against a young guy named Marty Lundy. How about that?
Yep.
Arn Anderson before he was Arn Anderson. It's just fun to sort of trace back the beginnings of all of this. Jim Cornette has gone on record to tell a story during this time where Steve is teaming with Hercules Hernandez against the Rock and Roll Express. And after a match, Steve and Herc are trying to leave the ring. And Jim said Hercules is throwing people over his head to get him out of the way. And Steve is just dropping people. And Jim has Steve's football helmet because Steve wore it to the ring. So Jim is hitting people with that.
God damn it. I never wore a helmet in my life. I'll kill you, son of a bitch. Don't touch my shit. Or me.
Jim says another night he's in a bar and referee Pee Wee Anderson rips his shirt off and gets on the bar and doing all these Hulk Hogan poses. And that leads to a bit of a little fracas, and Steve and Hercules beat up about a dozen guys. And he says they did get in trouble for that, but they didn't get fired because they won the fight. Yep. And we've heard about this rule. Tell us about this rule. Well, the Cowboy had a rule, and people think, oh, come on, that's in today's world of HR and all that stuff, it wouldn't fly. But Cowboy had a rule that if you get into a fight with a quote unquote civilian, i.e. a fan, or maybe it's a person not a fan, maybe they're an anti-fan, but nonetheless, if you got in a fight with a civilian and you got your ass whipped, you're out. You got your notice. You're done immediately. No note, you're done. And so that's why when guys like alpha males like Doc and Hercules Hernandez will go into a bar and they're having a social little cocktail and but the ladies there, were kind of diverting their attention from the guy they came with to these big muscle guys, these big, brutes in great shape and looking good and all that good stuff. So it always created some animosity. And Doc and Hercules especially, they weren't the only ones. We had some tough guys in that territory. Rick Steiner was there. He didn't lose any street fights. A lot of guys were just tougher than shit. Jim Duggan didn't lose any street fights. So Cowboy loved those guys because of their tenacity, and they protected the business. It's like that little bit of the same personality that we saw a few weeks ago on the Dark Side of the Ring with Dr. D. David Schultz. Yeah.
He protected the business, maybe with not the best logic, but the theory of protecting the business and why you're protecting the business in that era was very, very important. And a lot of guys were just raised with that deal, like we saw on the Dark Side thing that, Schultz was in training for weeks before he got smartened up that the business was showbiz.
Right.
So all they were doing there, the same thing everybody did teaching. If they can beat you up and hurt you and you quit, then you're not made for the business. So you don't tell them anything about the inner workings of the wrestling business until you see that they're going to be somebody that will commit themselves mentally and physically to the process. So that's kind of the deal with Doc. The rule was the rule. You lose a fight, And then Cowboy, of course, when he got details of a fight, he wanted all the details because he was living vicariously through these cats. If Bill was young and was in the wrestling business, he'd been the same way. He'd go to bars, try to steal your girlfriend. He might even steal your drink, intimidate you, and then the fight would ensue. Then he would knock somebody out in a couple of punches. And Doc and Hercules are a lot like that too. They're just so big, so strong, and quickness. It was they were a hard pair to beat in a street fight. So beating up 10 guys was not that unique. It happened before, and then finally when they go back to the bar the second time, ironically and amazingly, nobody gave him any shit.
Let's talk about another fight that's sort of become legendary, or I guess an almost fight. Cornette said once upon a time, Doc and Hawk had a confrontation, maybe in a locker room in Chicago, but they're cussing mad at each other, nose to nose. And Jim said he's trying to crawl in a locker and just get out of the way, but eventually cooler heads prevail. They don't come to blows, but Jim says he loved Hawk, but his money would have been on Doc. Do you remember hearing about this story that maybe there was a confrontation in the back between the two?
Yeah, of course. Two high-strung guys.
Right.
Two alpha males that didn't want to compromise. I was actually involved in a situation with those two guys in Florida at a TV. And I remember watching the ongoings with Nate, because Nate, of course, being a Minnesota guy, and Hawk being a Minnesotan, he said, "Oh man, your boy's going to get it tonight, JR." All right, okay, Nate. So the issue was that I got in between the guys and started, scolding them. I knew they weren't going to beat me up because that would not have been a big win on your 1-loss record. So the cooler heads prevailed. I said, "You guys are going to hurt each other. Then you're going to be off work, and then when you're off work, you're not going to make a goddamn dime. Is that what you want? Are you neither one? Are you both that stupid?" So I said, "Come on, get your shit together and move on. Let's just move on here." And that's kind of what we did on that deal. They didn't fight, but they sure as hell wanted to. And I'm not Cornette in that respect. My money would have been on Doc. And they said, "Well, why would you say that?" Because Hawk was a great street fighter. He had a hell of a punch. Those punches are rendered ineffective when the puncher is on his ass. He's on his back.
Right.
And that's what amateur wrestlers do. Doc would have broken him down, taken him off his feet, which would have negated the power of the punching power to a large degree. And that's how that fight would have ended. Then he would have mounted him, and then he would have beat the shit out of Hawk. That's what would have happened. And so he could have broken his hand. He could have broken orbital bones, noses, chipped teeth, all that stuff. So that nobody needed that, and they didn't need it. So cooler heads, as I said, prevailed, and they didn't come to blows. But I admire Hawk for Doc was a younger guy, and he, we didn't know what they didn't. A lot of those guys didn't know about the background as well as they should have, because he was a machine, and that's right down his alley. Doc's alley was, you want to get physical. I like that. So, but not too many guys tried him, quite frankly.
Let's keep it moving. Let's talk about some in-ring stuff. May 3rd, 1985, Steve is teaming with Ted DiBiase, and they beat the Rock and Roll Express to win the Mid-South Tag Team titles. I feel like a lot lately, especially this year, I've been covering topics on the podcast where more and more people credit Ted DiBiase as being a huge part of their development as a professional wrestler. Is that the case for Dr. Death as well? Yeah,
Teddy was, the second generation. His mom and dad both were pro wrestlers. Teddy's mom and dad, and so Teddy had the gene. He had the wrestling in his blood. And the other thing about Ted was always willing, much like he is today in his ministry. He was always willing to help people. And he also saw that Doc could help us all make money, more money, because then there was no merchandise, royalty checks. The wrestling conventions had not started. There weren't too many non-wrestling paid gigs. So, and we didn't have pay-per-view. So the way you made money was to sell tickets to the live events. That was it. And so if a talent saw another younger talent that might be able to help us achieve that goal, because that money all trickles down. If the pie is bigger, your slice will be bigger, and that's kind of, I think, how Teddy had looked at Doc. And of course, they had good chemistry. They liked each other. They had similar backgrounds as far as playing a little college football, and all that stuff. So, but Ted was a great teacher and a great motivator in that regard. So Teddy was a big part of Doc's early career without question.
They eventually dropped these tag titles, but win them back and then drop them and then win them back, and the typical fare. But one of the tag teams they encounter, besides other greats like Eddie Gilbert and Dick Murdoch and guys like that, the Sheepherders, who we know are going to become the Bushwhackers in the WWF, but the Mid-South presentation of the Sheepherders is a little different than the Bushwhackers.
Yeah, they were blood and guts, very aggressive. They were not a comedy act. They were stone cold heels. They played their role immensely well. They knew how to be heels. And one of the great things about being a heel in that era, especially in the Mid-South, was that Cowboy loved the heat. He loved to lead the crowd. His philosophy was, because we're going to be back here next week, same time, same place, different night, it wasn't always the happy ending at the, Conrad. It was just, he liked the people to leave talking and buzzing and angry and looking for more. And so that was kind of the formula there with that deal. And the Sheepherders fit right in because the key ingredient to being a heel in that era was you can't be afraid of the audience. You got to respect them. And certainly got to appreciate their fact they're buying a ticket. But you can't let the audience see you have fear or you're intimidated by the audience's presence. And the Sheepherders fit that bill very, very well. Most of their matches had blood. I'm not saying that's the right way to go or the wrong way to go, but so what it was. The theory is that if somebody's beating you in the face and they don't leave any DNA, and I said this before on this show, the guy getting the ropes, Irish whip, boom, you follow the guy in, you jump on the second rope, you start punching his face 10 times. It's got to be 10 because the audience is going to count with you. And then when you're done, there's no visual evidence that you were even there. There's no DNA. And so it's an expose in a large degree that your punches, you hit a guy 10 times in the face, no swelling, no redness, no bruising, no blood, no emotion. And so the Sheepherders they were a unique team. And by the time we got them, they'd been in the business a long time. They'd been in a lot of territories as the top heel team. And so they had their act down, man. They were very, very good. So working with guys like that, I've said this before many times, you can't get better unless you're working. You have to have two things in place. One, a live paying audience, certainly. You have to have that. And the other thing is you got to work with people that's better than you.
Right.
We talked just a second ago about Doc's first matches. Turk was an old veteran, been around forever. Billy Starr, veteran. Their skill set was better than Dr. Death's at that time. And that's why they were working with Doc. And those were TV matches, so they were short basically anyway. But they were better than Doc. And working with guys like that, even though they weren't household names, their skill set was more advanced. So if you have a paying audience that you can hear react to your stuff, and then you have this other element in place where your opponent's better than you, so you got to work up to their level. They don't have to work down to yours. It's a pretty winning formula. So I think in the early days, Cowboy was very protective of Doc because he saw that potentially Steve Dr. Death Williams could be the number one guy in the territory and be the guy we built around. And to a large degree, that happened in his early career.
Listen, every week I tell you that I can save you some money at savewithconrad.com, but I decided this week, let's do something a little different. Don't take my word for it. Let's read some 5-star reviews that were just left this month for savewithconrad.com. Christopher in Indiana says, the process was painless and easy, direct communication and quick responses to questions throughout the process. Honest advice put me in a position to save tons of money and pay off my mortgage quicker. Charles from Ohio, Jimmy is what made it great. He answered every one of my stupid questions with patience and grace. Brenda from Ohio, awesome right from the start. Being out of state was no issue. First Family made everything super easy and convenient. They were available before, during, and after business hours. I cannot say enough good things. Brian from Missouri, everyone was terrific.